today. So good morning, everybody. We are privileged to have Dr. John Corbett with us this morning. He's one of the big experts in agroclimatology. I will just say one or two words about his background, what he's doing now, so that we can know who he is. So John Corbett is an agricultural climatologist and an aWhere co-founder and chief executive officer. So he has co-founded aWhere. After graduating with honors from Dartmouth College, then earning a PhD from the University of Minnesota, John focused his career on growing a repertoire of applied temporal spatial applications in agricultural meteorology as part of a scalable enterprise location intelligence platform. With 20 plus years working in agriculture and international development, John now leads a team that includes software and database experts, agricultural scientists and business leaders, leveraging technology to deliver actionable, timely, location-specific information meeting a wide spectrum of needs across the agricultural value chain. In fact, when we were discussing this morning in my office, he was telling me that his main goal is really to take whatever we're doing now on station, in the labs, to the farmers, to the end users, and I think that's where he's focusing. Apply, get the research applied. So working closely with national and international organizations in the US, Kenya, Switzerland, and Mexico, John built and managed systems to utilize geoanalytical and real-time data and information to increase positive outcomes. Leveraging this expertise, John identified a major need in the marketplace that became the framework of aWhere's products. Prior to aWhere, John worked with Syngenta as head of global GIS at Texas A&M Blackland Research Center and with ICRAF in Nairobi, as well as with CIMIT in Mexico. So,
no, thank you guys. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all this morning. This idea of big data, some of you have heard this term, and the term is overused. I mean, it's people use it for many things, but think of it as a quantitative expression of an enormous amount of information that you can then localize and make very specific. That's the purpose. So you've heard of big data perhaps even in exercises where they predict what you will buy, like if you're on shopping online like Amazon or some of the big online shopping, it's predicting if you buy this thing or you like this book, it's predicting you would like these other books. This is big data. It's attempting to take a population of estimates to make very specific recommendations. And that's, in a fundamental sense, that is what agricultural climatology does. Whether it's adaptation, you develop some new germplasm, some new agronomic management, and you're saying, well, where should I be suggesting this is a good thing to go? So you look at all the characteristics of everything from socioeconomic to the agricultural climatology to the soils, and you suggest, okay, this technology will work really well in these areas. It makes perfect sense from that perspective, but it requires a lot of data. So I'm going to be talking today a little bit about this big data that we offer. We have a comprehensive agronomic weather database that's global. So we can do this. We can actually show you similarities in semi-arid regions of India to semi-arid regions of Mali, because we have all the data. We can talk about what farmers do to adapt. Okay, so I was mentioning the Earth's atmosphere is a heat engine. It's a giant heat engine. This is the Hadley cell. This is one of the problem areas that's going to happen. There's more energy. The deserts are probably going to expand. But that doesn't mean that the local weather in any specific area is going to go one way or the other. But the probability of drier dries is actually growing. So in North Africa today, I don't know if you knew this, but the Moroccan winter wheat harvest failed. It didn't rain. It's just, it was hot and dry all winter when it should have been a rainy season. And what this means is you're tripling the weather variance. This is really important. This is the signal that we're seeing globally today. Things are just different, and they're very different. It's raining in times where it never used to rain. It gets dry all of a sudden after the rains start, or you get significant droughts. You get all kinds of behaviors in the weather that are unexpected. And that's because the system is actually very different than it was 10 years ago. It's just more energy. Now, part of this problem for agriculture is what I was saying as we were getting started, that all variability is bad for agriculture. Anything not normal because the farmers, wherever they are, even up on a semi-arid fringe, even in really good areas, the variability means they are not anticipating even good weather. So like the rains last year were phenomenal, right? In Mali, rain until November. But who could take advantage of it? You didn't expect it, so you didn't plant longer season varieties, etc. The rains in Iowa, in the United States, this is one of the places on earth where maize and soybeans grow really, really well. The last 5 years have all been outside the 95th percentile in terms of statistically for spring, summer rains. Think about that for a while. If that pattern continues, which it's likely to, what you have is a different system. You can't say it's outside the normal anymore. You say, this is the new normal, and those older years are actually outside. It's a different way of looking at the world. The last 10 years has a very strong signal of increased variability. So some of the variability, though, is not expressed as a big event, like a cyclone or a drought. It's actually expressed, this was in the Wall Street Journal, which I found kind of interesting. It's just showing the warmer nights. And the problem with warmer nights expresses itself in this explosion of foliar diseases. So in your experiences here in Mali, last year with all that rain, were there more foliar diseases? Were there bacterial and viral and fungal infestations that were unexpectedly intense? So the common bean crop in Uganda a full year ago suffered about a 30% yield decline due to really foliar diseases that the farmers had never experienced, and the value chain, the agriculture value chain, didn't anticipate. So the local stockists had no crop protection. So they couldn't do anything about it. You see my point? If it's not normal, the system has to grow stronger. It needs more information so that it can provide things that are unexpected in a more effective and optimized manner. So here in Mali, what we're looking at in terms of this atmospheric warming, but this is global, okay? Sure, the temperatures are warmer, but the temperatures are warmer perhaps at night. And that may move the conditions conducive for foliar diseases from being marginal to optimal. That's all it had to do, 2 or 3 degrees warmer at night, something you wouldn't notice. In other words, it's a subtle change. It's measurable, but it's not something you can't point a finger at a giant windstorm or a huge rainfall event. It's very subtle. And this is where things get a little bit, in terms of risk. Risk for agriculture production and food security is significantly different today than it was before because of this variability. So what we know about the world today is that the population, especially in Africa, is meant to grow. It's predicted to grow. You guys have all seen this. You've seen that date of 2050. That means there's only 34 primary growing seasons to figure out how to feed a lot more people whose diet demands are changing, right? You all read all these things. My point is, if you have increased weather variability, this is already creating all kinds of instability. And the reason for that is you get a drought, what I call a pocket drought. And there's some things we've blogged on this before, and you can find it. This is a relatively limited area, like last year out near Zinder in eastern Niger, and the sorghum crop failed. So a lot of marginalized farmers had to leave. They went south into northeastern Nigeria, where they were very vulnerable, because that's where the rains were okay. Of course, you're going to go someplace where there's food, right? So you're going to go someplace where the rains were good. And Boko Haram is coming around the Lake Chad area, and there were lots of exploitative and human security issues. It had nothing to do specifically with the food situation at that location. Rather, it was the food situation somewhere else, nearby geography. So keeping track of things geographically becomes rather important. And this is sort of the direction that aWhere is headed. So the point here is that we're well aware that there's an information gap. So I was talking to Saviri beforehand. There's lots of efforts to produce these crude weather surfaces out there. This is what we've done. This is the science that I learned even in the CG system when I started at CIMMIT, but it's what I did for my PhD work in Eastern Kenya, which is this idea that you have to have a comprehensive understanding of what's going on over the whole of the geographic area to understand the ramifications of a single geographic area. So even if one area is doing really well, they may be vulnerable to food insecurity, not because they can't produce it, but because a geographically nearby area is suffering something bad and the people are moving in as refugees. I mean, Europe is experiencing this today. Why? Because of problems in the Middle East and a huge drought in Syria created a lot of marginalized people, and those people are flowing in, and it's creating a problem in Europe. This is a global problem. It's a phenomenon I don't think is going to go away. So as we start thinking about the information gap, this is what I envisioned, this is why we started this company, was to provide something in a geographically comprehensive and complete way. And I'll be touching on this. And it all has to start with something that actually is accurate at the field level. That's what big data does so well. If you can track things on you personally, we can find other people like you, so when you buy a certain book, we can suggest it to a person who's similar, right? So if you can track things at a farm level really well, other places that are experiencing the same thing, you can say, well, this worked really well here. Let's advise these guys over here to try this one. New technologies, new information, because you're geographically comprehensive. Okay, this is where, unfortunately, what's happened is PowerPoint that I'm using apparently is using a font that's not on your machine. So I'm sorry. I would have preferred to plug my laptop if that happens. Okay, what this is trying to say very badly now is that the geographers of the world have done the description really well. GIS is rather amazing. I think a lot of you know this. There's soils data, there's infrastructure, markets, there's all kinds of data, land use, land cover. What's missing is this idea of integrating it with models. So that's what's going on right now, a lot of model integration. Why? Because models are time sensitive. You have to do time in agriculture. You can't just use a static map. And what you're really trying to do is you're trying to collapse all this information into something like a prescription. Just like people in crowded cities look at their phones to see the traffic pattern right now to drive home to avoid traffic, or a weather forecast would tell you the rains are coming this particular time, and you know that if you're trying to drive someplace that road is really bad when it rains, you may not go. The point is you're looking at real-time data that is only valuable if you can see it in real time. It doesn't help you to make a map that's 3 days old where the rains are coming. It doesn't help you. And so all of this then collapses to try to get it to where it's automated, where in fact the system is reading all of your models, all of your science. It has made it and applied it to such a way that you don't need a person to be making a recommendation. You have a decision tree that's saying, okay, if they planted this variety in this location at this point in time, it's now at this level, this growth stage. And at this growth stage, if you see these kinds of additional rains and they're on this good soil, suggesting top dressing fertilizers are a really good idea because they'll get a really good agroeconomic, economic gain from it. Or suggesting crop protection because conditions are conducive. And if that disease shows up, the crop at that growth stage is vulnerable. It's a yield declining vulnerability. And these are really important facets of the nuance of your science because these are the things you measure. And what we're trying to do is express this and working obviously with partners and working out how to create automation so that farmers, and as you guys are well aware, this device that we also casually stare at in the middle of seminars that are boring and things like that. This device right here is the most powerful technology humans have ever created. And I get to say that very casually. It's better than the wheel. It's better than fire. And the reason is, it's because a scientist like you, and something you've studied and learned your whole life, can be sent to someone in a totally different country, different language, even using symbols, to help them make a decision today. Now think about that. Think of how interconnected we are. Okay? This is a really important detail of how to address weather variability is better information. And all the tools are in place to do it. I mean, I was talking to Severe just briefly about Minobi. That's what they do. They collect information through cell phones and they push it back, they disseminate it. It's all location specific and localized, otherwise it has no value. I mean, me telling you that, something very general doesn't help you make a decision. Telling you something very specific does. All right, so a bit about our company. So our company, aWhere, what we have, and this is something that's an opportunity for all of you because this data is available through an API right now. You can go online, go to a developer portal and start pulling the data down right away. We have the most complete ag weather information service and insight for real-time agricultural decisions globally. So our data cover all the agricultural area. We don't do the middle of the Sahara, we don't do Siberia, because there's nobody growing anything. So all of our algorithms are optimized for the growing season. Okay, so you have to be careful. A lot of weather companies will talk about their accuracy, but imagine the accuracy of your prediction it's not going to rain in the dry season. Yeah, really good prediction, but it doesn't matter. We optimize everything for when it matters to crops. And that's kind of an important characteristic. So what we do, we're focused exclusively on agriculture. We integrate a lot of data. So we are pulling satellite observed precipitation from multiple constellations. We're taking data from every ground station source we can find, we put it all together, and we're constructing something that is complete, and it's current, and it's consistent. All the variables are there every day. And that allows a scientist who's an agronomist or a plant breeder or a modeler, they don't have to worry about meteorology. They don't have to worry about missing data. And all of you know when you put out weather stations, they sometimes break, things go wrong, and if you don't have the data, your model won't run. You don't have to worry about that. And that's an important part of big data's promise, is that it has this data. And then the final piece is that we've created something, and this is the way big data works. When you have an API, it allows integration. It doesn't matter whether you're using, SQL or you're Postgres or something else, it doesn't matter. Because the API rules, the XML rules, allow you to acquire these data using whatever language and system you like to use, whether it's Python or JSON, it doesn't matter. Okay? So this one is an interesting one because what we're saying is our data are location specific. That particular field we can provide information about. And with those models, we can say things like how much do we irrigate, or when and what to spray. This is your models. This is the science of what an ICRSAT does. And then what you do is you do it everywhere. And the reason for that is everybody plants different things at different times. And the information has to be tailored to that particular situation. And the value of this, of course, is immense because there may be the learning that went in to advise that farmer may have come from a field in India or a field in Colorado, because it's semi-arid Colorado, okay? And so when you think about this, our company has contracts with companies like Monsanto. For 10 years, they've been buying our weather data for global maize breeding research and their biotech teams. Okay? Some of these other companies are really small, like you were telling me this morning that you guys like Siberia's drone? Like to see the drone? Well, Agronomics, we have several drone companies that are startups that use our weather data. And that's the point. They pull the data in using their API when they need it for where they need it. And so what we're doing is we're taking many, many data sources and putting them all together to make that particular thing accurate at that location. So what this means in Mali, here's a look, and I know you all have a lot more data than this. This data is available in real time, online, but the stations drop in and out all the time. That happens. We're working with a partner who's installed these locations here. There's 6 in Mali. Some, what we call an agromet weather station. They're cellular based, they report every 6 hours, hourly data. They're planning to put more in, these triangles, they're planning to put some more in. We're gonna head to Niamey tomorrow, actually. And the idea of this is that these calibrate what we do. They help calibrate that satellite-derived precipitation. They help calibrate what we do on the land. So what we're doing is we take data that might look like this, hourly data, and we turn it around and we use very good science, three-dimensional curvilinear functions. This is for the adiabatic variables, temperature and humidity. And we literally create a weather station. These are the observations, but this is your farm. We create a weather station every single location, including that one. It's a weather station's worth of data. So you have everything every 9 kilometers. And the 9 kilometers is because that is the highest resolution of these hourly precipitation satellite data that we get. We work with the Cooperative Institute for Research in the Atmosphere at Colorado State University. We have an exclusive agreement to consume their data. It's hourly rainfall data. It's not every hour, it's gaps. We consume other data sources, other constellations as well. We put all that together and we hand back a rainfall every day. Now, that rainfall might look like this. This is actually April 29th, a couple weeks ago. And every day is just a layer. And in the end, you end up with this, we draw it like this cube. Every one of these little cubes is just one location, and it has every single day, every variable. There's 8 variables everywhere. These data we say are the 4 C's. We say they're current and correct. In other words, they're accurate, and they're up to date to yesterday, and they're consistent, meaning once you write a tool to access the API, latitude, longitude, you will get a complete data set anywhere on Earth. So you might write a tool that works really well for your production area up here, sorghum or corn, over here in some rice or some cotton. You just change the latitude, longitude, your tool will work in Argentina, it'll work in India, it'll work in Southeast Asia. Now it'll work in terms of grabbing the data. Doesn't necessarily mean your model is tuned correctly for that ecology, but that's okay, it's a different issue. My point is this scales. This is really relevant if you're trying to impact hundreds of thousands, millions of smallholder farmers. It has to scale. It has to have no barriers to going from 10 research plots to 5,000 farmers to 1 million. And it scales. Now the other piece of this, that gets kind of important, is that when you're thinking of how all of this works, how it mashes together, this is things you don't have to worry about. So if you take ground stations and just produce sort of a area of influence, you would be really wrong. You could pull in a bunch of public satellite data and you would get much better. And then we add a bunch of data that you see how they're different. And the net effect is we have a really good rainfall data set. So up to yesterday, the curvilinear functions handle temperature and humidity. So we build these little weather stations, if you will. They're not physical weather stations, guys. They're weather stations worth of data. And then we add to it, and we update it every 6 hours, 8 days of daily forecast. So everywhere you go, you get 8 days into the future, and you can handle that however you want to. You can aggregate it as a day, you can aggregate it by whether it rains in the morning or the afternoon or night. You can see nighttime temperatures if you're studying foliar diseases. There's 8 days of hourly data for every location, updated every 6 hours. So this is an extremely robust private company, and that's the reason why I want to say this. We have taken the science, and I was with Simit and then ICRAF, we've taken the science out of CG, if you want to say it that way, and we've implemented it. And now we're making it available, if you will, to the CG. So Simit's looking at these data, and obviously ICRAF and other groups. And this is what it looks like. So this grid, and the lines aren't quite showing up, just the resolution. This grid covers the whole of the Earth, and I'll show you a picture of that. And this is like, these are the weather stations, okay? We're down here, right? Here's the weather stations. And if that's all you have, of course, you have no idea what's happening in between. Makes sense. But with a system like ours, we literally have the entire set of data that you might measure here. We have it in every single grid cell. Grid cell because that's the rainfall resolution. And again, the idea is look at the difference of observations. We actually have a rainfall observation every 81 square kilometers. It's still fairly coarse, but it's much higher resolution than you can get by just using ground stations. It covers the Earth. And this is going to get more and more important because right now in Middle and Central America, they are experiencing some significant droughts. They're tying it to El Nino, but there's some problems in Central Honduras and Nicaragua. The coffee trees are dying because it's too warm at night. Well, those lessons and the things that they're learning there are applicable in parts of Africa where you guys are working. Parts of Ethiopia, parts of Kenya, it's getting warmer at night. Certainly Southern Africa is suffering right now from a major drought. And all of these data are available to you right now. In some areas it goes back about 20 years, but I'm going to tell you right now, you don't want to use data more than about 10 years old. Because the system has changed. The variability is increasing, and the older data has lower variability. And that will actually cause, in my opinion, will cause your models to say something more stable than actually exists. So when we think about it, we can also put in not just data, we can actually build in a whole series of agronomic data, agronomic models. So there's already some growth stage models for maize and millet sorghum online. We actually have some stress indices built around potential evapotranspiration. We're calculating that every day. And that allows us to give crop stress indicators. Because whereas the deficit of rainfall is a part of drought, what also is coincident, as you are aware of this, when it's drier than normal in June, July here, it's often hotter than normal, right? So it's an added penalty. So here's a couple maps I made just a couple days ago. This is real data, live data from right now. And you can see that the rainy season kind of has started. Southern Mali was creeping upwards. A little rain last night. That thunder came in about, 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning. That's pretty cool, because that reminds me of home. We get these thunderstorms that roll through in the night. A little bit in Niger, but here's the point. When you look at the current rainfall, remember, farmers pay attention to whether the rainfall is normal or not. And so down here, what I've done is I've just compared the current rainfall, the difference in that sum of rainfall from the last 10 years, what we call LTN, long-term normal, it's just shorthand. And what you can see is that basically it's in this sort of, the colors aren't terribly differentiated here on the screen, but basically it's a little wetter than normal here, a little drier than normal in these areas, but it's pretty normal right now. It's not extraordinary. That's important to know. Here's another look at the same data, only now we're adding the temperature and the humidity piece in the PET variable. And here you're seeing that the absolute precipitation, the ratio, is still very dry. It's too early to plant, right? I mean, I'm asking you this question. Maybe down right in here, but mostly it's still pretty dry. When you have a P over PET ratio of less than about 0.6, you really can't even grow millet. North of 0.8, you can start planting maize. This is just rules of thumb. But when you look at it compared to normal, it's actually a little wetter than normal out here, but it's basically, again, it's very normal. Because I'm guessing that normal planting is starting about now, yeah? Is that true? A little later, but it's about now. People are starting to think about putting their seed in the ground, early June. The point is, with details like this, and you have to remember, as you look at this slide and you drill in, it's hard to see from far away, every one of those little grid cells is a complete calculation of the long-term and the current. So you know what's happening at that spot. And that means that you can track areas of unusual dry or wet and help those farmers adapt to climate change because you're actually tracking the effect of climate change, the impact, which is the weather variability. It gives your information service that much more localization, okay? So from a different data source, some of you may be using this. This is IFPRI's spatial allocation model for where crops are, because it's good to know where the crops are. So from a generalist perspective on a food security monitoring, because we're talking to, here in Mali, to some of the government officials, we're saying 80% of Mali's maize is shown in these grids here. It's coincident that the IFPRI data set is also this 9 kilometers. It's really 5 arc minutes GIS types, but it's a stable area. And over here, you're looking at sorghum, and you can zoom in, and here's that area around Zinder where there's lots of sorghum being grown. The point is, we have all of this data for every single one of those small areas where we know what farmers typically grow. You can see where I'm headed. More and more information allows you to make more and more specific recommendations. It's basically taking the science that all of you are involved with, taking out pieces of it that you have more confidence, operationalizing it, prescriptions, and then automating. And that's the big data value. And that's what we're headed, that's what we're trying to do. So this is just an example. This happens to come from health. One of the other things you can do with those data, of course, is you can aggregate them up. You can aggregate them up by anything, and you can put dashboards. Anything meaning you can do it by a production area, you can do it by a political zone, you can do it by a watershed, just an area of responsibility. The point here is it's very flexible, right? Spatial in time. In this case, it's a health one, but what you're seeing over here in this area of Uganda, you're seeing different districts. This is a health one. It's a dashboard. And of course, a dashboard built on top of different APIs. Remember, we're able to pull data from a weather API, just like you are. You can pull it from us, but you can also pull it from a soils API. There's AFSIS. And the idea here is that you can produce, you guys, your IT people, could produce a dashboard that's very specific to your particular program and project challenge. And this is the real opportunity of this, is that you don't have to worry about meteorological data anymore, okay? You don't have to worry about soils data, perhaps, because you can pull it from a known source. And I want to emphasize something here. Like soils data, these data don't have to be perfect to help you make a business decision. There's a big difference between trying to publish something with a scientific kind of level of peer review and a business level of decisions. Farmers are going to make a decision, right? They're going to go one way or the other. They're going to buy fertilizer or not. They're going to buy crop protection or not. And your advice to them can bend and influence their decision in the right direction. But the criteria for that decision have to be about executing and doing implementation. It can't be about, well, I'm not confident, I'm not 98% sure, because I guarantee you at 80% you're doing wonderfully. And that's a different criteria. So this is a big challenge in a research organization. Excuse me. So this API, the idea of an API, some of you I think are familiar with this, but the idea is that you have all this analytic stuff. So this could be aWhere, it could be soils, it could be your census, it could be a lot of things. And the computer scientists build on top of it. Think of it as a language, just like I don't speak French. Okay? Speak Spanish okay, speak a little Swahili now, I've forgotten a lot. My point is, if I am speaking in Russian right now, you don't understand me. The obvious solution is to have an interpreter, right? And sometimes they're simultaneous interpreters. So it doesn't matter that you don't speak Russian. The interpreter hears my Russian and speaks to you in English or French or whatever is your local language. And that's the translation box. You don't actually have to know it. So you don't have to know this. You just have to learn this. This is industry standard, which means you can pull it any way you want. If you want to use Excel, you can pull the data to Excel. It's actually rather simple. If you want to use our cloud processing, you can push your model to our cloud. It doesn't matter. And that's what the API enables. It's hugely enabling. And the better word, I think sometimes, for Stat, if I may, it scales. It allows you to scale your science. If you guys have good things that you want to tell to farmers, it's not just 25 farmers that you know, or maybe 2 companies where you know a bunch. You could go globally. And that's kind of what aWhere's trying to do. We're trying to go globally. And what this ICT thing is that it, not only can you collect data, you could have a progressive farmer who's willing to tell you all kinds of, you can send them surveys, right? You could ask them questions, and they text you back and answer them. But you can push data to it, right? You can tell them what the forecast is. You can give them a warning. You can give them an alert. You can say, hey, we know that your sorghum's at this growth stage, and this foliar disease, the conditions conducive for it, are very real 3 days from now, because you're looking at the forecast. You might consider spraying a prophylactic, because it's cost effective. If you spray today, it'll protect your crop. If you don't, it may not happen, right, because forecasts aren't perfect. But if it does happen, you're likely to get a yield impacting infection. This is very specific information that can be done now. And it's just taking good science and applying it, building that prescription, and then ultimately automating it. Ideas like this. At this particular growth stage, if you've got some rains, the soils are in pretty good shape, you may want to put more fertilizer. And here's where things get interesting. This is the value chain picture. Not only can I suggest to you, the farmer, and say, hey, you should buy some fertilizer. I can take all of you who happen to live in a certain area, we know where you live, right? It's geography. And we can take that and say, there's 400 farmers who planted maize at about the same time, all of whom would buy fertilizer. I can take that and I can send it to a fertilizer company and say, there's 2,000 hectares of maize right now in this particular area around this village. And here's you go take a bigger truck and drive out there and provide some fertilizer, and we can tell them that you're coming on Saturday morning. Governments like it. We can tell them they get a voucher or a special sale where for every 3 kilograms of fertilizer they buy, they get 4. In other words, you optimize with information the agriculture value chain. It all starts with knowing what's happening at the field. So we talk about a food or a human security information system because we're talking to governments and we're saying, look, we can monitor all around it, but more importantly, we can enable a community of practice. That's what they call the groups of computer scientists who sit together with businesses and solve things. So, Severi, if you don't mind, I keep picking on you, but he was in India last week, aWhere with David Bergelson's support, with ICRSAT support in Hyderabad. aWhere was part of a hackathon that was enormously successful, apparently. Microsoft was involved, other partners were involved. More than 100 people participated. There were 13 teams. And the idea is you take ag business, which may not realize that all this computer stuff is available to them, and you put them in the same room with some software developers, and you give them a challenge, solving something. And they start working together. This is like magic, because what starts to happen is the computer scientists, of course, find jobs, right? Because the companies realize how valuable this is. But all your science becomes implemented by the private sector, which therefore is sustainable. Because you're not really paying somebody to go do a project. Companies are incentivized to improve productivity by that farmer because they can provide that farmer a service. And the farmer will pay for that service. Maybe not initially. There's a lot of education going on right now, but there's some possibilities here. And you can query the farmers. You can talk about it. It has to be agile. These are business words. So what aWhere has done, there's a group called iShamba. Has anyone here heard of iShamba or Shamba Shakeup? So iShamba uses our weather data. They're impacting about, actually it's north of that now. Their goal was 400,000 farmers by June 1st. That means 400,000 farmers, not every day, because not every day is important, because weather's not the most important thing all the time. There's other things you have to do. But 400,000 farmers are getting information from this aWhere API right now. And in Ghana, one company called Isoko, again, some of you may have heard of Isoko, about 20,000 farmers are getting data. This is just proof that it works, guys. This works. There's other providers, other groups that do it. My point to you is that an API allows these guys to pull data from a company based in the United States, doesn't matter where the company, it's in the cloud, and apply it locally to individuals with whom they are doing business with. So iShamba's goal is to charge the farmers $1, it's 80 shillings, 100 shillings a month for all of the ag services they provide, so they become sustainable. So at some point in time, because we don't do it now, it's subsidized, but our data, which is part of that, iShamba would pay us some 10%, 10 cents a month per farmer, for basic data, forecast data. In other words, the value has to stack. You have to improve the value chain. And this is how a sustainable business emerges out of your science. So when we think about that value chain, what we're saying is we have focused on the farmer because, in fact, if you know the truth, my first job at Semi-Arid had to do with, can you help us with research prioritization? And all it is you guys encounter this, and I'm going to phrase it perhaps over simple, but if you encounter a problem, right, people start complaining of a particular disease, you have to decide, well, how important is it that we figure out how to fix that? How many farmers does it impact? Because if it's only going to impact a tiny part of this micro ecology, you're not going to do that because it's not effective. But if it's a widespread problem, you might say, wow, if we fix this, we can improve millet production by 22%. And then you can justify the economists and say, well, if you increase millet 22%, it's worth this much and this research costs this much. Absolutely, let's go do it. So a lot of this had to do with research prioritization at the beginning when I was with Semi-Arid, and even ISRAC. And today what we're seeing is the same information is obviously very valuable to the farmers because primarily we were providing this for research trial locations. So you guys have research trial locations all over Africa. You can literally take your 800 locations, 800 latitude, longitudes, and you have daily weather data for every location. So that's there, guys. I mean, that's available to you now. But what we're also finding is some of the commodity companies, the consumer companies, they have supply chain risk. I realize this is outside your process, but I don't know if you've noticed, but sugar prices have gone up about 40% in the last 4 months. Okay, this is global sugar prices. As you can imagine, if your company makes biscuits, if you make cake, if you're Coca-Cola, the amount of sugar you buy is in the millions. And in the millions, 40% increase in price, your profits just got impacted. So the supply chain likes to see, if you know how farmers are doing, they like that information as well. So here's a particular application. Because this data is available on API, you can make your own applications. This just happens to be one that was useful to drill down. I've selected a location near Mopti, apparently. This is last year, I think. And so I set the dates June to September. This was the rainfall. I think this is 2014. This is the rainfall and the average. This is the long term. This is the daily. Here's the deep red line is the average maximum temperature. The red line is actual. The point is you have all the data. That's all it is, you have all the data. You can write your own apps to do all of these things, whatever are your questions. And what that means is that, you hear all these different models from AppSim to DISAP to so forth. You can run every single model, every single location. And obviously now you have a way of assessing what farmers are experiencing in a very different way. Because if you planted 3 weeks ago, your growth stage is at this. If you planted 12 weeks ago, it's at that. This particular event impacts those farmers differently. We know this. This can get very important for the information you provide across the agricultural value chain. So one of the ways we do that, we produce a set of maps, just generic, so we can do anything we want. But that's the important thing is, this was last year, and we're looking at a period June through mid-September, this is what Mali looked like in terms of, I think this is rainfall compared, this is P/T compared to normal. And you can see you can make a histogram because remember, there's weather stations. Every one of these is made up of an actual observation set, which means I can present it this way. And right now, if I were, and I don't think I have one in here, if I had a map of Thailand's sugar, it's all red. It's way over here. It hasn't rained in 6 months in Thailand, and the sugar crop essentially is failing. They're down 40 or 50%. And that has repercussions globally. But you can start to monitor things on a global basis. You can monitor things by this one, which was production area, right? This is that IFPRI where cotton grows. This one is just a political district, right? So the administration in this area might want to monitor their, what is case? Is it a province or region? Region. Someone involved in charge of this area of responsibility could monitor their whole area. But if you're responsible for 250 field trials, farmer demonstration trials spread across, you could have 250 of these dots around Mali, and you could still do the histogram because you have 250 complete samples. So the visualization starts to communicate faster the situations that challenge you. Here's looking at Mopti last year. You can see that I put this red dot here because I zoom in here on a different map. So I'm looking here and I'm saying, well, this is a little drier than normal, but what does that mean in terms of agriculture? And so in terms of agriculture, it's just a little app, okay? And one of our data scientists did this, and she's like 27 years old. It took her probably about 20 hours of programming. It was pretty funny. She did it over Christmas break. But what it shows is, in the darker color, this is the actual weekly rainfall. And this lighter bar on the back is the long-term, it's actually a rolling 10-year average rainfall. So you'll notice they're slightly different because this year, which is the last 10 years, now for this year includes these data. What you're seeing in Mopti is they had a bit of a micro drought right in the middle of the season, but they actually had pretty good rain on either side of it. So although they were dry for 1, 2, 3, this was bad, 4 weeks, they got a little rain. It wasn't terrible. So now you're able to see how a crop model would show whether or not that drought was yield impacted or not for rain-fed agriculture. Okay, so how do we do this? Well, this information, you can look at it locally, you can look at it over a region, and we could do it for any geography you choose. You could do it for your 250 trial locations all over Africa, you could do it for a region, a political entity, you could do it for a production area, you could do it for your family's farm and your neighbors, and you can do whatever you want. You can choose any time period, right? Because you control the API. You can say, well, I want to do it from 2 weeks prior to planting, meaning right about now. I'm going to monitor from right about now. And you can use any index you choose. The fact that we're showing P/PET is just a reasonable rule of thumb crop stress index, but you could run a disset simulation model. You could use SARH. You could do whatever simple rules or complex rules you choose. You have great flexibility. And then what it does is you invert the equation. You say, if I know what sorts of seasons they are experiencing, I can inform them and other parts of the value chain. So you actually are strengthening the whole of the value chain just with better information, starting with that local piece. And obviously you start to influence food security as well as trade, as well as the markets. And then the point on this is that if maybe what you want to produce are just weekly reports or on-demand reports, meaning like a dashboard. These are possible. Because there are workflows right now that demand a report once a week. You could produce a report once a week. In other words, you could mimic the way it's done now while offering a real time. And that's how you educate. That's how you build up an expectation. And then finally, one of the things we're doing, Denver, Colorado, where I work and live, the National Center for Atmospheric Research. It's a giant National Science Foundation investment in weather type climate analysis. We're working with them. We don't have a timeline yet. They're trying to do a 90 to 120 day forecast, which obviously would be very valuable. I mean, groups do this, like IRI does this on a monthly basis, 3 months out. They're trying to, and lots of people are trying this, trying to get to more of like almost a daily forecast, because that will help you with agriculture, look at variability. So to sort of starting to summarize, what we talk about from this perspective is that this is innovation, and that this is big data, this is science, this is applied science. that we literally deal with billions of data points. As you can imagine, if you're updating the forecast for every one of those grid cells every 6 hours, this is just a huge amount of data. But that's not even important to you. You don't have to worry about that because whatever locations you want to pull the data for, it's always there. So I would suggest that you don't think about this in terms of downloading all this data to your database. What you do is you just utilize the cloud to calculate the things you need to do, and you pull down the insight from that data. You can pull down the data if you want to, but that starts to, you're just duplicating something, right? That's what it boils down to. What we like to call it is this weather agile agriculture. Because frankly, response farming, whatever, but my point is, if the variability of the weather is increased, your farmers need to become more agile, but the value chain also needs to be more agile. They have to know that they can buy fertilizer or crop protection that they need from the nearest village, nearest stocks. So it's complicated. Fricker said, here, look, you guys, you have tons of data about Africa. The GIS guys have done a magnificent job for the last 20 years. There's tons of data. There are models right now that predict pretty well the stuff that's going on. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. You look at the model and say, yeah, but it's telling me consistently that doing this action improves the odds of, or decreases the risk or helps them. You can start to use those. And by using those, you're writing a prescription. And if you can do this, you can automate it. And now it becomes this alert system. And I don't know in Mali if you all have this, but certainly in some parts of the world, you know, this device will automatically beep at you for thresholds you set. It can be for prices. Seriously. My son called me up about 3 weeks ago because Amazon.com has a special every day, and it was like, hey Dad, were you looking for this? It's on special today, 60 days off. It's an alert, or 60%. Okay, it can send you an alert. Like I get alerts because I'm monitoring some very large vegetable farms in Southern California. It doesn't rain much in Southern California. And it tells me when there's more than a 10 millimeter rainfall on the forecast. So I just want to know, I just want to kind of know. And I can do that. I mean, I'm sitting in Colorado and it's telling me this for California. So you can set these up, alerts up for a lot of different reasons and thresholds and geographies. And the idea the idea here is very clear. You want to deliver succinct information, actionable insight, something in a SMS perhaps. But you want to target. You want to target what you're sending. You want to predict it. And this is really the key. You have to have the right location at the right time, all the time. Because a general advisory, yeah, it's useful, but it's not necessarily pertinent to you. And if you want to build value, it has to be pertinent. And it's this idea of being agile. And this is a concept, unleashing yourselves, taking the science, getting toward execution and implementation. So finally, you have this idea of a location-based intelligence for food security. We use words like SaaS, which is a solution that's online, business intelligence for food. These are just buzzwords. But here's a point that I want to make. You know, I would say, and you all will know this, what's the penetration of cell phones, not smartphones, cell phones, just feature phones in Mali for farmers? Is the penetration pushing 90%, 80%? Pardon? Yeah, but it's getting there, right? So here's my point. There is no excuse for any farmer anywhere within a cell network, which is going to be 75 acres of farms. Actually, maybe even more than that, because to not get at least a forecast. Because that forecast can influence their decisions. Even if it's going to rain tomorrow afternoon, tells them what they might do, makes their workflow more optimal. Now I realize there's apparently insurmountable hurdles, like, well, how do you send it to them in your language? Well, Isoko solved that. They build emoticons, little symbols. It's going to rain, right? A little cloud with some drops, or it's bright sunshine. Come on, this isn't impossible. But there's no excuse for any farmer to not be receiving data because statistically, just better forecast data improves productivity 30%. Think about it. That's huge. Pays school fees, keeps people healthier, food security. This part, you don't need to build an IT infrastructure. You just don't need to build that IT infrastructure to manage all that data because it's already on the cloud. The soils data, the weather data, all these things are being put out there and managed So like our data is now with a company called ViaWest. It's like, think of Amazon Cloud or Microsoft Cloud. It's a cloud company. And it never goes down, never runs out of power, because that's the only thing they do. That's really important, because the slide earlier about aWhere, we only do one thing. We do agronomic weather. And because we're focused on doing one thing, we can be really good at it, is what my point is. We're not trying to do too many things. We're not trying to be IT specialists. We're not trying to do agronomic research on improving DISAP. We can't afford it. We want to scale a certain thing. This is just a teamwork. It's partnering. It's working together to solve big problems. And the big problem that's coming, in my opinion, one of the big problems that's going to impact Europe is weather variability. It already is manifesting itself all over the place. So finally, you've got this, kind of got a vision here. There's three factors. This stuff is out there. It works. This is out there. It works. And this is out there. It works. All of these pieces are in place to take your science and scale it. And that's how you impact 580 million farmers. And we can do it. You're gonna have to work together. Can't be afraid to work with private companies. You've got to extend yourselves a little bit. I mean, that's just a part of science that I think gets really interesting. So in review, weather variability is increasing. Food demand is growing. Quality data is critical. Why would you want to use bad data? You don't. In fact, you spend a lot of your time trying to clean up data. Traditional models, new data, predictive analytics, these things are actually really valuable. Even rules of thumb are useful because people understand them. And when you understand something, now let's go back to that business decision 80-20. But that can tell you that certain things you need to turn right. Quantitative models might not know how to quite do that yet, but you and I both know that, yeah, you're right, when that happens, doing this is a good idea. Well, if I can quantify that, just give it a little nudge, and I'm right, even 7 or 6 times out of 10, I've made a difference, right? 80-20. I don't have to be perfect. I just need to be better. And as I like to say, I just need to be excellent. Because perfection is going to just slow you down, okay? And then finally, I want to say something here. This is kind of curious. Some of you may have seen this book, and I would encourage some of you to look at it. It's pretty cool. It's called Anti-Fragile. This guy is really smart. He wrote a book called The Black Swan, which is really hard to read for me. I don't have enough mathematics. He wrote another one called Fooled by Randomness, which I think is pretty interesting. This Anti-Fragile, though, is really interesting. I'm going to ask you a question. If I asked you, what is the opposite of fragile? Answer. What's the opposite of fragile? Come on. Resilient. Any other words? Come on. Strong, robust. He says, no. If you think of a spectrum, you've got fragile, like your grandma's teacup or something very fragile out here. The word you just described was in the middle. Strong, robust, resilient. He says there's no word for it, so he invented one. He calls it anti-fragile. What he says is systems that are complex need to be anti-fragile. What it means is they can't be rigid. They can't be, this is what we're going to do when this happens, because of the black swan, right? You don't know what's going to happen. And things can happen now that have never happened in the past. So he describes systems that learn from feedback. And he points to the human body. If all of you just went home today and went to bed and did nothing for 30 days, after 30 days you'd be weaker and sicker. Because you actually need to walk around, to pick up a child, to carry a bag, to go in and out of the door, walk up the stairs. That feedback makes your body healthier. The agricultural value chain is a very complex system. It needs feedback. So take data, for example. Our data, to be specific, it isn't perfect. But if farmers are getting it and we're wrong, they let us know. Then we look at our algorithms and we're like, oh, okay, all of these farmers in these areas and the satellite stuff, infrared, microwave look like this, we're underestimating rainfall. When that happens, we can change the algorithm and then it makes it better for everybody. So when you think about a system and you think about ICTs, the real value is not you pushing data to someone, it's the ability for that person to send you back a signal that helps you make the system better. It gets better. So his book is titled, it says here, Things That Gain from Disorder. So whereas a strong thing, you can hit it really hard, it will break. It doesn't get stronger when you hit it. This idea of anti-fragile is build systems that demand feedback and they get better because of it. It's kind of a cool concept. And with that, I think I'd like to close. My colleagues couldn't make it because it's complex, as you know, but we're trying to get a meeting with the Minister of Agriculture here in Mali, and we weren't sure, so they stayed on call to try to make us see. Thank you very much for your time and attention today.
Yeah, I don't know what to say, but this 1 hour or so I think has passed very, very fast. It's called a school of convincing. A school of presentation convincing, and not only was a scientist in ICRAP and civic, but now he's in the business world. And in the business world, you have to really convince him. I think we were really convinced. At least I was convinced. I don't know what.
So we would like to work with you. You can work with us without even telling us anything.
So,
yeah.
Really, I think that was an excellent presentation.
Thank
and
you.
As our colleagues from Hyderabad said, I think maybe you can lower it, because they may be asking questions. So they said you give that was at the end of it. Just before I open it up, I want to ask you, you know Shiva Kumar, who used to be an agroclimatologist at KSIConnect.
Yes, I know that name because I studied his papers when I was in school.
And then he moved into
WMO. Yes.
He did some prediction, and I think he was looking at weather. And
I read his papers.
And one, I think, thing that he has left us with is that if there's early onset of rains, that means the cropping, the growing season will be long.
That's a typical kind of thing.
So is it something that is now so much variability? Does it still go like that?
I would suggest you better look at the data more, because what we're seeing is rain, like in Kenya this year, it actually rained in February, which in Kenya is very unusual in that part of Kenya. And of course everybody thought, oh, the rains have come, and some people planted, and then it didn't rain at all in March, and it didn't even rain well into April. And the point is, it's very erratic in ways that are, I don't know how to answer that question. The problem that I found, and the reason why I know about rains in February, I used to play rugby when I was a young man, and I played for the Kenya Harlequins. And playing in February was hard because it was so dry. The ground was really hard, right? So when it rained, it was like, that softens the ground, so you pay attention to it. But my point being that I think weather variability is going to become, and is already, a much bigger problem than people realize. And the old rules may not work, and that's actually really scary, because a lot of indigenous knowledge is tied to that long history. And if you change the environment, you have people who are really not wanting. I mean, the U.S. is the same way. Farmers are like, I've lived here 40 years, there's no way. And it's like, yeah, actually, you've got a problem.
Okay, we have a question from our Deputy Director General, Peter Carroll.
Okay.
Seasonal climate forecast at best shift probabilities, never give certainty. Will often be wrong when possible, devastating consequences for resourceful farmers. Should not this be the narrative rather than promoting deterministic certain forecasts?
Peter, absolutely. And I'm not a climate scientist on the forecasting. I mean, the devastating consequences, again, you set expectations. That's the first thing. All of the forecasts we're talking about, of course, are process-based short-term forecasts, 8 days, maybe up to 15 days. I think it is yet to be demonstrated that a true seasonal forecast can be trusted. And adoption of a seasonal forecast information is going to be really hard. And in the more marginal areas, it's going to be even more difficult to predict, because the semi-arid areas are already the more variable areas. With the new weather system out there, they're even more variable. And so this is trouble, particularly at AgriSat, because you focus on the semi-arid.
Any question from the floor? Or somebody is typing? Yes, good. Hey, just a minute, please. Sorry. We have colleagues from ICRAP, from AVRDC, from where again? Yeah, he's from ICRAP, and there's also AVRDC here. One every Agri and AVR also here. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, John. I really appreciate your talk.
Speak loudly.
My question is, listening to your presentation, it's like historical data, kind of data, are now useless. because you said the variability in those data was much more marginal compared to what we are experiencing now. So, do we have any kind of use we can do with those historical data, or just forget about them?
Okay, thank you. I hear two parts to that question. I would suggest that if your interests are agronomy and adaptation, genetics, you only want to use the last no more than 10 years of data, because the system has shifted, and what you would be introducing is information from a more stable climate, which won't help you. It'll actually give you, it'll skew your results. The other piece of that is interesting. We are approached by micro-insurance companies, and in many ways, their math is so sophisticated. You know, these are actuarials, right? And they want 30 years of data. They insist on it. And I keep my instinct, and I'm not enough of a statistician. I have good stats, but I'm not a statistician. My instinct is they're making the same mistake, though, that they're overexposed. Because if you use 30 years and your system is not in stasis, which it isn't, meaning there's a trend, and you're not careful, those older data are giving you confidence at your risk level, which is actually in error. So for me, my advice is using the recent past has a good signal because the variability is already big. Using longer period, that signal is less valuable today because the system is changed. I mean, in the US, and I only use the US example here because it's actually kind of funny. You know, we have a winter, we have a cold, and the seed companies sell their seed, and they always put a little map on the back as to when you should plant it, depending on where you live. It's no different than the rainy season here in Hong. And they had to change their maps about 2 years ago because, you know, they were saying, well, you should plant in May, and now they're saying you should plant in April because it's just warmer. The growing season is longer. And my point is that older data isn't necessarily very helpful, but it does depend on what you're doing. I mean, there are some things that if you wanted to look at the change in risk over time, obviously the older data are very valuable to you, you know, because you're actually showing that variability increase. But I think it really depends on the question. But if you're really after helping farmers, I mean, farmers, come on, they remember the last 3 and 4 and 5 years really well. And if they're older, they may remember things being more stable. But if you're trying to help them produce food this season, I think you need to be cognizant that the last few years has a good signal, and the older data probably don't have as good a signal. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, Sarajit, then Sibiri, and then Anton.
Thank you, John, for your presentation. I would like to know what is the accuracy of your forecasting? For example,
We don't make the forecast. Okay?
it is forecasting.
We are agnostic. We use GFS. We've used ECMWF from the Europeans. We'll use a WRF model, but we don't generate the forecast. Like we're an API delivery, what we've done is made it convenient for agricultural entities to get to a forecast plus, but you could actually, if you wanted to, we have a partner company that is a spin-off from the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and they have a 15-day forecast. But if you want to use their forecast, you have to pay for it. But we make it easy. You can go through our API to get their forecast. It just saves you having to program hitting a different API. I mean, it's more business effective to provision data. But the accuracy of the forecasts, I would then say, to go back to it, are well studied, but they're not necessarily well studied for agriculture. For example, ECMWF is statistically more accurate, for it has more layers, it's more robust than the GFS. But the differentiation tends to be around some rather refined things like wintertime cold season temperatures, which in Europe and US are quite important, but for agriculture it doesn't make any difference. And then another one they were really good at is, they did better at was one of these big convective cells that create thunderstorms. The ECMWF does a better job tracking the size and projecting the size of those storms. But my point being is that accuracy is well known, but be careful when you read accuracy that it's actually a description of analyses that is pertinent to your business question. Because as you can see, I've been asked this question even about our observed data. The best way I can answer it is the way Monsanto did. When they first started buying our data, this is observed. They put up weather stations in fields, and they compared our data to the weather station. And of course, weather stations are expensive, right? You sell your weather station will cost you today about $1,200 for a battery-powered one and a little more for solar. What they found was is that our data, though it differed sometimes from the ground stations that they had, right? I mean, it would differ, as you can imagine. They would have made no different decisions. So they stopped buying weather stations, and they just used our data. In other words, for their business question, agriculture, our data are significantly of value, such that they would not spend thousands of dollars to put up additional weather stations.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. What do you think is the main weakness in the current aWhere weather surfaces, and how are you working to address it?
Oh, Sabir, that's a loaded question from so many angles because it depends on geography. I mean, in Mali, we're putting up weather stations because we feel like the number of calibration locations is a little thin. Now, you have access to more stations, but they're not real-time. We have to have real-time data because farmers are needing things now. So one of the weaknesses that I would say that we're constantly striving to improve is to incorporate more and more of the different types of observation data sets that are out there, because everybody's machine is different. Like Davis Scientific is different than Oregon, is different than Decagon, is different than, and we want to use anyone's data. Anyone who has data that we can pull in, we will try to use it. The next weakness is, if we started being successful with that, I would like that data to go to GFS, to the forecasting, because then you're inputting data into their models. But that's a government thing if it's GFS. There are work models, the regional models, and those companies tend to be very eager to consume more data. So it's hard to answer a question like that because it varies by geography. Our accuracy is really pretty good everywhere, and it's better in some areas and better for certain times of the growing season, but accuracy is funny. Like I said, it's about the business question. And if you compare it to ground stations, it's going to be different anyways. Sometimes the ground stations are wrong if you're out of calibration in a microclimate. They break, stuff like that. So, this has been the focus of our work. So the data are really good. And that's the best I can say at this point. We have statistics that I can share with you, but I guarantee you it'll just make you ask more questions, because in the end, it really depends on what business question you're trying to address, and is it good enough to actually say, okay, that's good enough, I'm moving on to another problem I have in my model.
Thanks, John. I have a small question about the long-term data information. I think they are still important.
Which weather?
Long-term.
Yes, okay.
Following those questions. When you take the system management, referring to trees, for example, tree selection and so forth, I think the long-term information is quite important.
Okay.
In system management, I think it should be kept before.
As you said, I think it's the business question you're asking.
Yeah. Because agricultural crops, I understand what you mean, but when you come to long-term tree crops, I think this kind of information is needed.
The one thing I would ask, because I've seen some studies now that used ensemble averages for the future climate. Unfortunately, I feel like they didn't, and this is not my main area. I don't focus on this, and I don't do research, but I have a question back to you, which is, it is an ecological max axiom that the adaptation of a species, like a tree, is determined by the extremes, not the average, right? It's the depth of the dry season, or how intense the cold is, or how hot it gets, that defines whether that species can live there. So I think the signal in the recent past needs to also be looked at carefully, even for tree systems. Because if the dry season is getting longer and your tree species can only go 2 or 3 months, and all of a sudden it's 3 or 4 or 5 months, is it going to make it? And I think that that's an important thing to be cognizant of. But I don't know. I don't know.
Now the question is, what's the price of accessing your data?
So, no, that's a very good question. We obviously are trying to make it as a commercial company. We're not profitable yet. We had a couple of years where we broke even, but we're doing okay, and we're not going to go away. We have a good investor community. So the price is commercial, it's actually about $50 per virtual weather station. But for an INCRAF, for a AgriSat, for a not-for-profit, and then it depends on how much area you want. And the price is actually very reasonable. So to invert the picture, for iShamba, right now it's the data are subsidized by a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant, which has another 14 months. So right now there's no cost. We look for projects though to put a value on it because they need to start paying for the other services we provide, right? Because I can't provide human services if we're not compensated. Obviously I have to pay for someone's salary. So the way it kind of works with iShamba, just as a for example, they have 400,000 farmers. Now their goal is to charge those farmers about $1 a month for their services. And they also know that maybe 10 or 20% will pay this. They don't know yet, but that's the goal. What we will ask then is 10% of that per year. That's the 10 cents per month. In other words, there is a cost because we have to continue our operation. And so the answer back to you is really it depends, but it depends on how much, if you want all of access to the whole planet, we can do that. We just have to look at what you're using it for and how much of our services you're going to hit. Because if you're pulling lots and lots of data, we of course have to charge for it because we have to pay the cloud company to expand the CPUs and the amount of network access. So the price, to give you a commercial price, it's literally $50 per grid cell. So Monsanto buys thousands of grid cells and you can do the math. For other companies though, it's cents, and it's just because it depends. And it's fair. It's not-for-profits are very different than commercial companies. Entrepreneurs, small companies are very different than established companies. Because there's genuine value to this.
I had some questions which are already been answered.
Oh, good.
That's why I'm figuring those questions. So now I would like to know what's the accuracy of the data you provide? Yes, it's not the seasonal forecast, but the data itself, because you do merging and all that. So
No,
yeah. The second question is, you said you do the data you provide is at a resolution of 9 kilometers. There are some other companies like CAMSAT, they provide data at like around 5 kilometers. So are you thinking of improving the resolution of the data?
I think you have to look into their science. The satellites don't have that resolution. Sorry, they might, but they don't have the temporal coverage. In other words, don't ask resolution as the main question, ask the accuracy question. Okay, so is CAMSAT giving you the data you need? Then obviously that's great. But if you feel like sometimes it's a bit shaky, you might compare it to ours and be able to say, well, this one seems better. The reason is that we are very focused on delivering the best data possible. We have not been able to provide rainfall. We can take the temperature and humidity actually to the latitude, longitude, elevation. So we can take that to a point. That's very specific. So those curvilinear functions bend the land, the elevation. But for rainfall, the limiting factor is the satellite resolution. So I can't answer about those other ones. I don't know. I just know that our data are very good, and we even have some exclusive access to data no one else does. So that's my answer. Now, in terms of accuracy, I'm right back to, it depends on your question. It literally depends on your question. I can give you numbers, but I'll tell you they vary by geography. Like we're within 18 millimeters of seasonal rainfall on average over the globe. But then I'll also tell you that in Bangladesh during the high monsoon, we're way off. Satellites don't capture well those really intense rainfall events at 80, 90 millimeters a day. They don't do very good. Sometimes they say 40, sometimes they say 120. You see what I mean? So there's problems. The temperature data were phenomenally accurate. And that's why Monsanto likes us, because those growth stage models demand temperature accuracy. And we're within a ½ degree C, plus or minus. So over the whole growing season, we're literally not off by more than a day in terms of growing readings. So the accuracy is really good, but again, it will vary by geography. You may find in eastern Senegal, well, it's not that good. Well, I can't answer for that, but that is the reason why I mentioned on my last slide, the feedback is so important. Because we can look at certain geographies and say, let's adjust our calibration for this area. Because we calibrate against every ground station. So it's a very complicated amount of work. And we're trying to automate it, we're trying to make it richer. But if obviously I couldn't possibly know the nuances of every place. But when someone gives us feedback and says, hey, you know what? you've been consistently a little warm or consistently a little wet here. We can look at our system and say, okay, we'll adjust for that. And that can help everyone.
Sure, last two questions, Vinano and Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, John, for your presentation. I was thinking nice. My point is, you have developed algorithms, questions, and also based on the observable data sets, you are just providing data at scale, different scale from farm to watershed or this. My question is, in your algorithm, have you ever tried to include perception of the changes, climate change?
The perception of climate change.
Climate change, like communities or different organizations define and test results.
So interestingly, simple answer, no, we don't have the resources to do that, but we're partners on multiple projects that are doing it. In fact, I'm writing a piece of a proposal right now, pursuing some DFID dollars, that it looks at conflict. And in that conflict is this perception piece. And people who are far more studied in socioeconomics and the human part are the ones using it. What we're doing is we're coupling our data to better refine the contextual questions that they ask. So I think that's a very important piece. Do people perceive the weather is changing? I mean, that's very important, but no, we do not explicitly do that. We don't have the resources.
Thanks. Catherine?
Thank you for the presentation. Yes. And I have a small question for your work. Does the forecast producer really necessarily a forecast to take advantage of the work? If this is the case, here we have the forecast data, but it's not specific to locality. That is a big problem that we have. The forecast is general.
The general forecast.
Forecast every day, but it's not specific for any location. That is a bit forecast. And I want to know also if you have some experience with farmers. You have
Yeah, we have anecdotal, of course.
Farm level,
Yeah.
for farmers.
Oh yeah, we have a lot of anecdotal where farmers, especially with the weather variability, thanking us for the forecast. Okay, I mean, it's not perfect though, guys. I mean, no forecast is. But within 2 or 3 days, the models are much better than they ever used to be. And they're pretty accurate. And we are very localized, I mean, so that it's not a general forecast. If you were to look at the forecast for Bamako and look at the forecast for here, there will be subtle differences between them. Maybe not big, because obviously, I mean, they're not far away. But, and yes, we do have, and mind you, you usually hear from farmers when the forecast isn't right? You don't often get compliments when you are right. But we have farmers occasionally saying things, you saved me, as an Indian farmer, you saved me 2,000 lakhs. And I don't know what that, lakh is a big number.
100,000.
Yeah, rupees, because I didn't spray, had a water-soluble spray, because our forecasted some rain that was out of season, and it actually rained. So he wrote us, he said, you saved me so much money because I would have sprayed, but your forecast said no. I mean, but that's anecdotal, but I don't want to overemphasize the anecdotal.
Okay, so I think the question that was asked by Antoine about the cost, but now, as I was telling you this morning, in February 2014, when David was around, and the hotel I had on the laptop, I had the aWhere database. How can any one of us get it? Is it just get in there and you can get it? There's no
If you go to literally http://developer.aware.com, it will tell you how to get the data today. Now, obviously, I will then say this, we made one mistake, I will confess. We should have made more apps that I could just give you the app. As it is right now, we expected your computer science, your IT people to show you how to pull the data. That was a bit of an oversight. We're retroactively, I have a lot of apps I can run myself, but they're not ready for deployment. We do have one call center app that we could give you, which is you just click on a map and it gives you the forecast in the last 10 days of rain, or the last 10 days of weather. I mean, but that was our mistake as a company, because you have to know some computer science language to get the data, but you only have to do that once, so you can hire someone or whatever. But yes, those data are available today. And yes, by the way, we will want to charge you something, even if it's just $2,000. Seriously, for the whole thing, because what we need, you have to put a value on it. Because if it's free, you won't pay any attention. It's a very strange psychological thing, but if you pay something, it changes your attitude. I mean, we have a little tiny company in Jamaica that sends us $200 a month for what they need. And we're not trying to make them pay too. They have to get their business going. But the point was, by paying for it, they now demand, if you will, some value. And so I do make it clear, we will make a contract. We would have to. We have to be able to say to our investors, they're on board. But I mean, it doesn't have to be very much to begin with. Although we have projects with other centers with things that, because then we come in for training, we'll teach you, we'll have a workshop here, and that's why you were there. That's why the team was at ICRSAT Hyderabad. Part of it was to educate people on how to do this stuff. And obviously, you have to pay for that. I mean, our travel and time, and it's the normal stuff. But
So I think you have to pay. In fact, an example of northern Nigeria, Kadawa. I only know the wheat project in Kadawa, northern Nigeria.
Yes.
The government was subsidizing water, and they're saying farmers can pay per unit of area irrigated, not per volume.
right,
They will come and open in the morning and let the water.
right, which is a waste.
Because they're not paying.
There's no incentive.
No
Yeah.
incentive, so they have to do
No,
that.
the truth of it, actually, we've learned this, even those small companies, the startups, we ask them to pay something. And we give them the price of what they will pay as it grows. So that everybody understands we're investing in them too. But I will tell you, if you go there today, right away you'll get 30 days, no charge for anything. And obviously if you write us, we can change the window. But yes, this is meant to be a healthy relationship, and it really can't be for free, guys, because if it's free, it has no value to you either.
So get your budget codes ready, so. One last question.
Well, we want to work with you anyways. I mean, come on, I started my career in the CGC. And you aircraft guys, there's no sin in guys.
John, one thing that I'm curious of knowing is, like, you are meeting now with the government officials, your colleagues about, what is the key message you're giving the government? How can they really support this work in Mali? What are we telling them?
Trying to see it. I thought I had more slides with me. What we're telling them is that we can help them in their administrative hierarchy. That's okay. I mean, manage. If you go back up to those, just go back to the slide that has the map of Mali with one of the regions, just because, like that. We're just saying, look, the GIS layers have lots of other data, right? Soil, we know all of them. These things are here. This is just the weather piece. So we're a small part of it. But this drives the models. It's the fuel for the crop models. And food security is a growing issue. In Mali, our champion was the president of I'm going to get it wrong because I don't speak French, but it's the Rural Commission on Agriculture and the Environment. And he was also the president of the Association of Mayors. I guess it's a very important body in Mali of the mayors of the towns. And he's now the ambassador to India. He's the Malian ambassador to India. And his name is Ambassador Yesamaki. And he came into my office like 2 years ago, and I was showing him these things live. I mean, I was drilling into his hometown. And he said to me, John, and I think, Sabir, you would agree with this, he said, this can transform Malian agriculture. That's a big vision. And it's not the whole solution, but it's a piece of it. It's this information that allows the input providers to have the right things and the markets to have the right information. Imagine if your business was chickens. You were growing chicken broilers to feed chickens, to sell the chickens to the market. You need to source maize or sorghum to feed the chickens. Where are you going to get it? If you have this, and let's pretend that this color is like bad drought, and this color is good yield. Well, you're going to know that you need to go here or here. You need to contract with farmers to buy your feed so that you can keep your business going. That's ag value chain information. Same with the input providers. Say this is a map of disease pressure. You can see that these areas are more acute. They need to go there with this many liters of this particular product to help those farmers who are growing beans or who are growing millage or growing cotton. My point is this information optimizes and makes more efficient everybody. And so when we talk to the Minister of Agriculture, which I hope we are today, my colleagues, or maybe this afternoon I'll be able to, we may be able to help. We may be part of that solution. And then the real advantage of markets, if you back up to whole of Mali, I don't have it on your thing, but because we're also monitoring Burkina, Niger, Cote d'Ivoire, and Senegal, the governments can see local markets that might need their product, or local markets that might have a surplus to buy the product. So this information starts to have global scale, because here's the other thing I will tell you. You guys know that the price of maize in Mali is partially dictated by the global price of maize, which means if the crop fails in Argentina and the price goes up, it'll be more valuable in Mali, right? I mean, it's connected. And the more connected you are, the more information you need. To compete.
Thank you again, and thank you for your participation. I think we're going to keep in touch.
Sure.
And see how we can really work together. So thank you. At least I think we need 2 minutes. Yeah, that's after. I think you can start having your coffee. Thank you. Maybe you need to have.
They want me to sit?
Yeah, sit for. So. Thank you.